Hey, it's Coach Taylor here from SmarterTeamTraining.com. I'm using social media, which hopefully everybody else is as well listening to the show, and I'm using it to enhance my network. And I got a guy on the phone here that's been very open on some different formats on Facebook in particular. We've gone back and forth just having cool conversations on Facebook, and we've never actually talked in person or on the phone for that matter. And so it's actually cool to get the chance to reach out to Academy Hedrick and get a chance to talk to him. I've actually got to give everybody a little heads up before getting started in the conversation. When we do the STT events, whether the regional event or the conference as a whole, Human Kinetics sends me some books. And one book that I do ask them to send me is Dumbbell Training. And they also send me a couple DVDs every once in a while. And I actually look for a DVD called Strength for Sports Performance. And both Alan has actually been involved with, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about that. But if anybody's looking for a little bit of an opportunity to enhance their professional development, I would recommend those two resources. And then, again, reaching out to Coach and just asking him some questions. So, hey, Coach, man, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I know it's end of the summer here, and you guys got a busy schedule. So I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day just to share your thoughts and some of your experiences with us here on the show, my man.
For me, it's truly an honor to be asked to do this, so it's my pleasure to be here for sure.
Hey, Coach, man, before we get started here too deep into the Q&A kind of scenario that I have planned for us, I'd like to know a little bit about you as a person. I mean, I got a chance to obviously read your bio and go through the Google search type scenario before getting on the show, and to be very honest, well before that, knowing a little bit about your history in the field. Obviously, I respect your travels within the industry as a whole. So I'm actually more curious about you as a person, man. Can you tell me a little bit about your passion for the field? I mean, kind of how you got started and really what you're doing now.
I started training back in 1972, probably 1971, as a high school football athlete. I had a combination of being too small and too slow, which is never a winning combination. But I really tried to emphasize increasing my performance capabilities through training myself. And this was back in high school in a small little corner of the gym with a universal weight machine. But it's something that I've always been interested in. Like most people, I'm drawn to things I'm good at, and I found I was pretty good in terms of training in the weight room. So it's always been an area of interest for me, and I just feel so fortunate that I'm able to be in a profession where it's something that I enjoy doing. I've been working as a strength coach at various levels for over 20 years now, and I can tell you, honestly, I feel as anxious and look forward to going to work in my 20 whatever year as I did my first year. So it's something I've always just really enjoyed doing.
If an athlete walks into your facility there, obviously, I want to know a little bit of how you can walk me through the opportunity for them before they even get started to work with you. I mean, what are you doing with them? I mean, what tests do you do with your athletes? How many times a year? Are you taking them through movement screens? Are you a conditioning guy or a strength testing guy? I mean, can you walk me through a little bit of that pre-participation evaluation, if you wouldn't mind calling it that?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you here. We're in a situation where we work with well over 500 athletes, close to 600 athletes, and we have a pretty small staff. So trying to have the time. So, for example, we have about 150 football players right now and probably 60-some new athletes, new freshman athletes coming in that are already here as a part of a fall camp that's going on, and we have another group that will be coming in with the start of school next week. So it puts us in a difficult situation to try to do a lot of pre-screening, pre-testing. We just don't have the time to do that. We put a big emphasis, one, on explaining what our goals are for them, what our expectations are for them, the design of the program. One thing I always try to emphasize as a strength and conditioning coach is not to just tell my athletes what to do, but why we do it. I feel like if we explain why we want them to do a certain thing, why we do things a certain way, and they have an understanding of it, then they're going to buy into the program more effectively. So we spend a lot of time just trying to explain what it is we're trying to accomplish, why we do the things that we do, so that we can get that buy-in right away. The other thing, this may sound unusual for a lot of people in terms of bringing an athlete in right away. But for us, we always put a big emphasis on the Olympic-style exercises, specifically cleans, jerks, and snatches, both with barbells and dumbbells. And one thing that we typically do right away is start teaching them how to perform, for example, a hang power clean. I always say this: if the coach told me that I have one exercise that I have time to use as a part of our training program, it would probably be some variation of that clean. So we start with an unloaded bar and start really working on the basic techniques of that exercise, so that we can get them as proficient as possible, as quickly as possible with that movement. That's an exercise. Those are exercises that we emphasize, and so if we can get them proficient at those movements, then we can build from that.
I appreciate you bringing up the concept of the Olympic lifts. And one question that always comes to my mind when we start having that conversation is based around progression and then percentages and rep schemes and that type of scenario. I mean, what determines your progression, and then how do you determine or identify the percentages and the rep schemes in your programming?
A couple of things. One, we take a approach that's backwards from what I see a lot of people doing, in that a lot of programs I see, especially at the high school level, we have high school football camps that come in during the summer, and they make use of the weight room. And it seems like their primary emphasis is always the intensity of their training rather than the technique that's being demonstrated. So one thing that we address right off the bat, getting back to that initial screening or introduction process, is I tell them right away, hey, our emphasis is on technique first and intensity second. The best thing I can do for you as an athlete is to get your technique solid. I can only get you as strong and powerful, as explosive as possible if we emphasize great technique right off the bat. So our emphasis is always going to be technique first and intensity second. In terms of percentages, we use a set and rep scheme rather than a percentage scheme for the majority of the year. So, but what I mean by that, they're basing their weight selection based on their ability to complete the required number of repetitions with good technique, rather than going to a table and saying, okay, I'm at 80% today, for example, or 70%. We want them to base their training load based on their technique and their ability to complete their repetitions correctly, rather than looking at a table. The only exception to that occurs in season with our veteran athletes. We test all our athletes right before the season starts, and then we'll have them use a percentage system in season. Research tells us that they have to lift somewhere between 80 and 85% of their maximum to be able to maintain their strength levels. And so really that's, for most of our athletes, that's our goal in season. We're just trying to maintain their current strength and power levels. So we'll use a percentage system in season, but other than that, it's just based on their ability to complete the required number of repetitions correctly with that good technique. In terms of the set and rep scheme, I'm a guy that likes to do planning ahead of time. So everything is laid out for the entire year, for the entire training year, when they initiate their training program. So if you ask me, if it's August now, and you ask me what they're going to be doing in January, I can look it up and tell you. So I really try to have everything out planned as far ahead of time as reasonable, so that I can do a better job with their program design.
I don't have a very good background in the Olympic lifts from a coaching aspect of it, and I've only had a couple of experiences working directly with an environment that has Olympic lifting as part of the foundation of that, if you want to call it the core lifts in the program. So I'm always curious to know, if you wouldn't mind, what are some appropriate coaching cues when spotting or coaching the Olympic lifts, and then how long does it take to become proficient in the skill of executing the lifts?
That's a difficult question to answer, in that it's going to vary from case to case, individual to individual, based on the techniques that they're demonstrating. Again, we always emphasize, we literally start with an unloaded bar and build from there, emphasizing that great technique before we start worrying about how much weight they're able to put on the bar. So it's always going to be a matter of technique first and then building from there. We have some athletes, they literally surprise me or amaze me in that we can take them through, and by the end of the first week or so, obviously not using a lot of weight typically, but from a positioning standpoint, they're hitting the correct positions, and they pick it up right away for whatever reason. And there's other athletes who literally never did it. We have athletes who we try to teach how to perform a clean, for example, and eventually we get to the point where we say, this is not working out. This is not an exercise that you're ever going to become proficient at. So let's look at an alternative that can get the same benefits, but you can do correctly. So it really varies from case to case, both in the cues that you're providing to them and in terms of how quickly they pick up the movement pattern correctly.
Again, going down that road again with the Olympic lifts, my question, getting a chance to see a lot of different programs from a distance or from afar, I'm always seeing guys or some ladies are designing programs that sometimes are pulling from the floor or sometimes they're pulling from a block or a lifted scenario, and then sometimes they're finishing in the catch or they're dropping. I mean, how often do you pull from the floor, and then also how often are you finishing in the catch?
In terms of the start position, we try to base that on the sport and the position they play quite a bit. So, for example, if you look at our skill positions, our running backs, our defensive backs, our wideouts, for example, they pretty much play in a hang position. And so we put a bigger emphasis on pulling from that hang position rather than the floor for a good part of the season. I like to try to provide a variation in their training program. So typically with those athletes, we'll start their off-season training program pulling from the floor. But then as we get closer and closer to the competitive phase, we're trying to become more and more sport-specific in everything that we do. So we'll go to that more sport-specific hang position for those athletes. In contrast to that, our offensive defensive linemen, for example, primarily initiate each play with their hand on the ground. And so we'll emphasize pulling from the floor with those athletes, and we take the reverse approach just, again, to provide variation for them. So we'll initiate their off-season training pulling from a hang, but as we get closer to the competitive phase, and again, we're trying to become more and more sport and position specific, we'll move them down so that they're doing more and more movements from the floor. In terms of the catch position, for example, we're in the middle of fall camp with our football athletes. We had a large number of freshman athletes come in. And so initially we're just having them all perform power cleans, for example, rather than full cleans. They're working out with the veteran athletes, and so we got half of the group performing that full movement and half the group of freshman athletes just move using that power position, just so that we can build on their technique a little bit. So what position they start position, what start position they use, what catch position they use. It's a matter of what position they play, what sport they play, and what their experience level is.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of squatting, front squatting versus back squatting, where it's appropriate to use both or when it's not appropriate to use either for that matter. I mean, do you guys do front squatting or back squatting, and kind of what do you see as the benefits of either one? Are you using both when you're doing program design? And then again, when are they appropriate? In season, out of season, in the summer? I mean, how are you really implementing that modality into your program?
Again, I'm a big believer of providing variation for them. The longest we program any cycle is typically 5 weeks. So every 5 weeks they can have a different workout in their hands. If they're lifting 3 or 4 days a week or whatever the number is, they're performing a different workout each time they come into the room. Another thing that we'll do in terms of variations, we alternate the sequence at which they perform the workouts on a weekly basis. So what I mean by that is, for example, if football is lifting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the first week, obviously, their Monday workout is their Monday workout, their Wednesday workout is their Wednesday workout, and their Friday workout is their Friday workout. But we advance that by 1 day each week. So that second week, what was their Friday workout becomes their Monday workout, what was their Monday workout becomes their Wednesday workout, and their Wednesday workout becomes their Friday workout. So what I'm trying to avoid is an athlete walking into the room today, okay, today's Wednesday, I'm doing squats today. So we change it up on a regular basis. My thought process on that is that exercise acts as a stressor on the body, and that's a good thing to a degree. You want the to apply that stress and force the body to adapt. The difficult part of that is the body is so good at adapting to the stress that you apply to it. You know, you think about initiating a new training program after you've been off for a while. You may get extremely sore the first week of your training program and a lot less sore on that second week. And by the third week, you can go through that same training program that produced so much soreness the first week, and the body has adapted so quickly that you're not really getting any soreness at all. So we're trying to provide as much variation as we can. So one thing that we do in terms of squats, for example, is that we'll vary between squats on one cycle and then go to front squats the next cycle and vary those two exercises on each subsequent cycle that they're using. Again, trying to provide that variation. The one thing I'll do in season, I find that squats are a little bit more stressful to the athlete, especially with the low back. So we'll strictly use back squats in season. But other than that, they're varying on a regular basis on each cycle. They're going to alternate between squats and back squats, squats and front squats.
I'd like to ask you a question about the depth of squatting, whether you're catching the Olympic lift in that position where it's either in the basement, if they, as they say, or are you guys doing quarter squats? Are you doing box squats? I mean, how are you justifying the depth of squatting? Are you using some type of movement screen to justify individual discrepancies within the movement pattern? And can you just walk me through the process there of how you justify the quality of a rep as far as the distance down goes?
Yeah, I haven't met too many individuals. There's a few who lack the flexibility to, for example, squat to parallel, and that's what we look at. We're trying to get the center of the knee joint and the center of the hip joint lined up. A few athletes are inflexible enough that they find that very difficult to achieve, and so we'll obviously adjust our expectation based on their capability. But for the vast majority of our athletes, we expect that parallel position. If they go lower than that, and some of our athletes do, and I feel very comfortable with that, I don't think there's any problem whatsoever. They've looked at the stability of the knee joints of Olympic weightlifters who obviously squat with a great deal of weight to an extreme depth, and their knees don't show any laxity as a result of that deep squat position with those heavy weights on a regular basis. So I don't think there's any problem with squatting below parallel. To be honest with you, I compete in the sport of weightlifting myself at the master's level, obviously, and I train with my daughter on a regular basis. Like most females, she has a superior level of flexibility than I do, and she squats very deeply, and she's been working with me over the last couple of months trying to get me to squat lower. So I just turned 58, and I'm squatting well below parallel myself, and I have no problems with that whatsoever. One variation that we will make on that is in season. We'll adjust our expectations a little bit, just because of the fatigue and the pounding, especially with our football athletes. We'll allow them to squat a couple inches above parallel. So part of our expectation is based on where they're at in their season or with their competition schedule.
Nowadays, when I get a chance to do consulting, one of the common questions that I'm getting is whether you should lift or condition before or after practice. And again, getting an opportunity to talk to a guy that has over 2 decades of experience. I appreciate you going down this road with me here for a second. What do you feel is the best time to strength train? Are you going before or after sports practice or that skill acquisition type scenario? Do you have a preference about going in the morning or the evening? Are you trying to get it in before or after classes? I mean, your college environment obviously is very unique compared to the private sector, if you want to call it that. But I mean, in a world where we had a perfect opportunity to train people, which may or may not exist depending on how it works out, but I mean, what would you feel would be the best way to train somebody around a skill acquisition or a sport type practice?
I would say off season, if it's sport, they also have they also have a capability of practice. So, for example, football or soccer actually have training and competitive, not necessarily with actual games for football, but soccer actually plays games during that non-competitive season. But I would say this, so I think in an ideal situation during the off season, I mean, if they're also involved in sort of practice, I would like to see them to be able to train prior to practice. You know, during the off season, emphasis is on getting as much strength, power, and size increases based on position sport that you're playing. You want as much increases in those capabilities as possible during the off season. So I would want my training to occur before any other activities, so that when the athletes come into the weight room, they're as fatigue-free as possible. You know, in contrast to that, in-season ideal situation, you know, obviously skill acquisition and being very high skill in terms of your performance during practice and learning new skills. Obviously trying to weight train before that could hinder their optimal capability in terms of skill enhancement. So I think at that point, during the in-season phase, lifting after practice would make the most sense. You know, the reality, though, in the college situation, so much driven by class schedule and practice schedule, that we're not always in an optimal situation. We have to make do with what actually works, given our parameters that we're working with.
Now that I get a chance to get out of the college environment, or actually get an opportunity to work in the private sector, I get an opportunity to work with a lot of younger athletes, and sometimes they're 9, 10, 11, 12 for that matter, that early high school age, and then getting them prepared to go into college. My question to you, when it revolves around anything related to strength and conditioning related, are there exercises that you feel are more or less appropriate for young players? Are there some exercises that you avoid or even would encourage in your strength and conditioning program?
You know, so I have to be honest with you, I don't really have very much experience working with younger athletes. You know, for the vast majority of my career, I've been working with either at the college level or at the Olympic Training Center while I worked there. So I don't have a lot of experience with working with younger athletes. However, it's been my experience with the athletes that I have had the opportunity to work with, those younger athletes, depending on their maturity level, based on their movement skills, I think it's completely appropriate to start teaching them the Olympic lifts. You know, those lifts are performed in a standing position, using a movement pattern that's so similar to sports, using all the major muscle groups. So I don't have any problem whatsoever teaching athletes as young as 11 or 12 years old how to do those movements correctly, as long as they have the basic strength levels required. And you can certainly work with something lighter than a bar, even, you know, just a broomstick or a piece of PCV or whatever. And as long as they have the maturity to be coachable and something that takes the ability to concentrate and focus a little bit, then I think those exercises are completely appropriate for an athlete of that age. You know, I'm always trying to get the most bang for my buck in terms of the time spent in the weight room and time spent training, and I feel like those exercises are going to provide that for me. So if they have the maturity and the movement capabilities to perform those exercises correctly, I would definitely start there.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the concept of the word plateau, and people are designing strength conditioning programs, especially the strength training aspect. Generally, some people early on in the career, they have that question oftentimes about plateauing and how do you avoid plateauing. And I also want to talk to you about a little bit about exercise selection, so how you're keeping things fresh, if you want to call it that. I like that you're at the idea of having a different program every 5 weeks, that concept, and hearing that you're doing that, as opposed to just one workout all year long on a Monday, one workout all year long on a Tuesday, and so forth. I mean, can you offer some basic guidelines for avoiding plateaus and a little bit of how you're avoiding potential injuries? How are you identifying that and working that into your program?
A couple of things come to mind right away as you ask me the question. One, I utilize, a variation of undulating periodization with our athletes, where that we're trying to focus on two different physiological adaptations within the same training week. So, for example, during the summer with my football athletes, football is a power sport, and so as we get that close to the competitive phase, we want to really focus on making them as powerful as possible. And so 2 of the 3 days that they're in the weight room, their emphasis is on power development with exercise choice and program design. But football is also a muscular endurance sport. If you think about it, at the end of a 15 or 16 play drive, and we have the ball, it's 4th and 1 on the goal line, and we need to score a touchdown to win the game. Obviously, there's a muscular endurance component to that as well. So on that third training day, we've got two power days in, and then we put that emphasis on muscular endurance on that third day. So they're not constantly, for example, emphasizing power, putting that high stress on the body in terms of heavier weights and very explosive movements. On that muscular endurance day, the speed of movement is going to be slower, obviously. The rest times are shorter, so they can't use as much weight. So providing that variation, I think, helps in terms of the recovery process and avoiding that plateau. The other thing is that we really try to give them as much variation with our training program. So, for example, with my big skill position athletes on the football team, they're on the barbell side of the room once a week and on the dumbbell side that third day. So they got 2 barbell days and 1 dumbbell day. In contrast to that, my skill position athletes are over on the dumbbell side twice a week and on the barbell side once a week. So they're really getting a lot of variation with their training program just based on that. In addition, one thing that I've really liked to emphasize over the last several years is that we like to supplement their dumbbell training days with water-filled implements. So we have a water-filled combination of water and sand-filled kegs in the weight room, a water-filled log, and so they're getting a lot of variation that way. So in terms of avoiding a plateau, avoiding becoming stale, a lot of a plateau, I think, becomes more just as much mental as physical. So we're really trying to give them as much variation as possible. I look at it this way. When they walk in the weight room, I want them to have to look at their workout to know what they're doing that day. So we try to mix it up as much as possible. Another thing that I've been doing over the last couple of years is that we'll build in a recovery week into their training program. So we use the last weeks, for example. If it's a 5-week cycle, we're going to make that 5th week a recovery week. And the way that we do that is that I make sure that the reps on week 1 are at the higher range of my set and rep scheme for that specific cycle. So maybe they're doing 4 sets of 8 on that first week. During that last week, what we have them do is we'll drop the reps way down to maybe, say, 4. So what they do is they take a look at what the weight they used on that week 1 when they're performing, for example, a set of 8 on squats or 4 sets of 8 on squats. And on that last week, they're just performing 4 reps, but we have them use that same weight that they used during week 1. So it's automatically built in terms of the intensity at which their training drops way back because they're using that higher rep weight on a lower rep training day. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and we seem to have been pretty effective at that. We really haven't had a problems. We just got done testing our football athletes, for example, and it's pretty consistently that year after year we see a progression in terms of their performance capabilities. Obviously, as they advance from a freshman to a sophomore to a junior and then finally to a senior with a redshirt year even, the increases become smaller typically each year. But we're continuing to see a progression. So it would seem that we've been pretty effective at avoiding having that plateau effect show up based on what we're doing with them.
I know you've been in the field for quite a bit of time here. I know you had an opportunity to work at the NSCA headquarters in Colorado Springs. I know you did an outstanding job over at Air Force, and now being at the Colorado State University-Pueblo. I'm certain that you've had a big-time impact on a lot of different individuals. And one question before letting you get off the phone here with me, I want to know a little bit about if you have a motivational message that you like to share with people when you get a chance to present or get in a huddle, man. I want to know, if I'm in a huddle with you, is there something that you hope that those athletes you get a chance to work with or be around on a daily basis really get a chance to take away from you?
Sir, for a couple of things come to mind as you ask that question. One, you have to be true to your personality. So, I'm not a get in your face, yell in the weight room, jumping around. I take much more of a business approach. That doesn't mean that we don't train with a great deal of intensity, because we do. It's always surprising during a recruiting process with our football athletes. One of the main things that happens during that recruiting process while they're on campus is they make sure to come into the weight room and watch our athletes train. And the comments that we always get from both the parents and the athletes themselves is that they're always astonished at the intensity level at which we train. So we've been able to establish an expectation of training at a very high level right off the bat. At CSU-Pueblo, with the football program, they dropped the program for about 20 years and then brought it back. And even though I didn't work full-time with the program that first year, I was involved as a consultant basically on the outside, from the outside looking in kind of, and I had the opportunity to address that team, very first team meeting of that first year. And one thing I told them, I said, I feel like this is the most important year of the entire training program, the duration of the training program, in that we have to establish a standard right off the bat. It's much easier to establish expectation than to change the expectation. So I felt like we need to be very, very demanding with those athletes that first year, so they became aware right away that was the expectation, to train at that intensity level, and then we could build on that rather than coming and having to try to change a culture that had already been established. One thing that we constantly tell our athletes is we expect them to outwork everyone that we play. Each week, we open up against West Texas in 2 weeks from today, actually. And so one thing we've been talking about the entire summer is outworking West Texas. We feel like if we can outwork each opponent that we play, we have a pretty good opportunity to be successful. So it's more of a business-like approach. We don't do a lot of, I don't do a lot of yelling and screaming. It happens once in a while. But, one thing I can say is that I've found a technique that works pretty well, both in terms of intensity and technique. So, for example, in our weight room, we have 12 platforms that can potentially be being used at the same time. So let's say we got 12 athletes squatting, for example. We got 11 athletes using great technique, and we got a 12th athlete who's being sloppy with what he's doing, not really focusing on the details. What I'll do as a coach is I'll stop the entire group, so all 12 athletes have to rack the bar. I'll coach the mistake loud enough so that everyone can hear it. Just calmly coach the mistake. But then we make the entire group start over. So each athlete, all 12 athletes, has to perform that set over again. So for me, obviously it's a peer pressure situation at that point. So I don't have to really yell too much, because that athlete has 11 athletes who's not really very happy with him for not doing the movement correctly. And so it's worked pretty effective. If we're outside running and we have an athlete who doesn't finish a sprint, doesn't work at the proper intensity level, we'll call the entire group back and make them all do it again. We cannot win. We cannot win with that intensity that you just demonstrated. You need to either step up or find someplace else to be one of those two things. So again, it's a pretty business-like approach, but we found ways to make that work with the things that I just described. So I think that the vast majority of people would be pretty impressed with our intensity at which we train if they have the opportunity to watch us.
Well, Coach, man, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day here. I know you're a busy guy getting done with camp and all. Again, I'm going to say thank you very much for obviously taking some time out of your schedule throughout your career and writing the book and the DVD. I think it's a very good resource. Both of them are for young professionals and people interested in learning more about what's going on in the field and just expanding their professional toolbox, a training toolbox for that matter. If someone was actually reading the book or getting a chance to watch the videos or getting a chance to see you present or even just listening to the podcast here, how could they go about reaching out to you to find out more information about what you got going on or just to generally just to talk shop with you about training?
I would suggest a couple of different ways. One, I am on Facebook under my name. But we also have a Colorado State University-Pueblo strength and conditioning page where I'm constantly posting videos of our athletes training and for the most part trying to explain what it is we're trying to accomplish with the movements that are being demonstrated. So certainly via Facebook, either on my own personal page or that strength conditioning page would be an effective way to reach out to me. And I certainly feel comfortable giving out my work email address as well. So for that, it's just Allen, ALLEN Hedrick, HEDRICK @ and then it's Colo, abbreviated for Colorado, so COLO State Pueblo, PUEBLO.edu. So, and certainly they can go to our athletic department website, and my email address is listed there as well. So any of those methods, and I feel like this. I'm very, very fortunate to be involved in a profession that I just enjoy so much. I don't have a job. I have a profession that I'm just so fortunate to have been involved in for such a long period of time. And so I make it a point, anytime anyone reaches out to me, I feel like I have an obligation to follow up on that. So I never receive an email or a text that I don't respond to. I've never respected people who don't follow up with that. I'm in a great situation, and if I can pay it back somehow, getting back in touch with someone who's reached out to me, I always do so.
Well, again, Coach, man, I'll let you go here. I know you're a busy dude and got a lot of things going on there. So, again, I applaud the opportunity just to get a chance to talk to you. Thank you very much for getting on the show. I look forward to this being a launching pad for us to do some things down the road, and hopefully we can keep in touch, my man.
Hey, I appreciate that very much. And, again, I was honored when you reached out and asked me if I'd be interested in doing this. So my appreciation goes out to you as well.